يا الله أكبر. يا
Soy un guerrero, nadie me puede parar, con la fuerza en mi pecho listo para luchar, romper barreras, no voy a dudar, mis cartas están listas, estoy para ganar.
Okay, so Janine, you are an anti-war and social justice activist. You are also a supporter of the Cuban Revolution. You write for Fire This Time, which is an independent newspaper reflecting the struggles of oppressed people, and a member of Vancouver's mobilization against war and occupation. What can you tell me about yourself? Like, what's more to tell about yourself?
Yes, all of that is correct. And I am the chair of Mobilization Against War and Occupation, MAWO, primarily, based in Vancouver, Canada. And I'd love to tell your listeners more about what we're doing and encourage people to get more involved with us. But that is a great introduction. Thank you, Zainab.
Thank you too. Yeah, I think what you're doing is huge. You know, when the world is so silent, especially the West, you know, even a lot of Arab countries, they're just silent. And it takes a lot of courage to, you know, defy the national narrative or the international narrative and speak the truth out. So please tell me all you would like to say.
Yeah, so here in Mobilization Against War and Occupation, MAWO, we've been organizing actually coming up to 21 years against wars and occupations from Iraq to Afghanistan to Syria to Yemen to, of course, always to Palestine, to Libya, and you know, anywhere that US and Canadian imperialism is focusing their war drive is where we are organizing, and primarily with the central demand of self-determination for all oppressed nations, which we feel is a very important central demand. So in the last year, especially, of course, our focus has been on the really critical fight of the world right now, which is to defend Palestine and to defend also Lebanon now against Israeli Zionist brutality and war and genocide, and these war crimes and crimes against humanity that we're seeing committed every day. So here in Mobilization Against War and Occupation, right now we're organizing 3 weekly events that we encourage people to get involved in Vancouver. Every Monday, we have a picket action in front of the United States Consulate in Vancouver at 5 p.m. Because we know, of course, that it's the United States that's sending the weapons. It's the United States that's giving the support to Israel that really is working hand in hand in committing genocide. So we're out in front of the U.S. Consulate every Monday. Every Friday at 4:30, we have a banner drop in different parts of Vancouver, not just Vancouver, but the surrounding cities around Vancouver. And we put up our banners, we put up the Palestinian and Lebanese flag and the Yemen's flag on these overpasses and on busy streets and highways, and have our banners saying ceasefire now, stop bombing, Gaza, Israel, US, hands off, Lebanon and Palestine. And we have just so many cars that go by that honk in support, that give us peace signs out the windows, that people that come by and support us and show that really there is broad and widespread support for Palestine. And then every Sunday we hold an info booth because, as I'll want to talk about a little bit more, we really feel like it's important to combat the miseducation, the misinformation, the imperialist propaganda that people are fed on a daily basis, to combat that with alternative media, with discussions. And so we have an info booth for Palestine and Lebanon in downtown Vancouver every Sunday. And we talk to people who come up who are happy to see that someone is organizing and happy to talk to someone who have questions, who want to learn more about what's happening and how they can get involved. So those are 3 weekly events that we have here in Vancouver.
Are you sometimes faced by, people who are anti-Palestinians, especially, in Canada? You will find so many of those. And in that case, what do you guys do?
Of course, being on the streets, we are confronted with people who are pro-Zionist, pro-Israel, and maybe sometimes because they are really a victim to the misinformation, and sometimes because they know what they're doing, unfortunately. And I think the important thing that we do is we do not engage with those people. Those people are not worth having, distracting from the more important work of talking to people who are questioning, are supportive, are wanting to learn more about Palestine and Lebanon. And also we know that these people are provocateurs often. They want us to respond. They want to try and pin something against us. And so it really is, if we're not responding to them, if we're de-escalating and disengaging from talking to them, it is doing exactly what they don't want. So we really don't want to be distracted by Zionists who are coming to disrupt us. We very much are putting forward that we have a right to protest. We have a right to be on the streets for Palestine and Gaza and Lebanon, and we are not going to be distracted and harassed by people that are trying to prevent us from doing that. Overwhelmingly, when we're out on the streets, we have support. The people that come and try and disrupt people who are pro-Zionist, they are definitely in the minority. And in fact, sometimes when they are harassing us, we have more support because there are more people who come and see, oh, I see this group protesting and or talking to people about Palestine, and they're being attacked by Zionists. I'm going to go support them more. So really, we have to recognize that those Zionists, those people who are harassing or trying to provoke us, are very much in the minority.
So why does the Latin American world show a great deal of support for Palestine?
I'm glad to start off with that question. The support for Palestine is very, very strong in Latin America, and we also need to see that kind of support, of course, from the rest of the world. And I think we're starting to more, but the resistance the support in Latin America for Palestine is really, I think, inspired from the resistance in Palestine that has inspired thousands of people, millions of people, especially in Latin America, but also in many other countries, because they have shown that imperialism, US imperialism, can be confronted. I think there's also very much a history of US imperialism in Latin America. So in Latin America, there is a history of US imperialism, trying to gain hegemony of Latin America. Just in the last 21 years or so of this century, there's been more than 27 actually, US-backed coups and attempted coups in Latin America. We've seen beyond that, though, more than 75 years of history of US interventions and coups in Latin America. Of course, with the 1973 coup against Chile, against Salvador Allende, the president. More recently, the coup against Evo Morales in Bolivia, the first indigenous president. And also, we've seen the attempted coups in Venezuela, many attempted coups in the last many years that have tried to overthrow basically any government that is independent of the United States, any government that is exercising their sovereignty, their self-determination is a threat to US imperialist hegemony. And we see also a huge campaign of sanctions against Latin American countries who are standing up against U.S. imperialism. In Venezuela, in April 2019, there was a report from the Center of Economic and Policy Research that estimated U.S. economic sanctions were responsible for more than 40,000 deaths in 1 year alone, from 2017 to 2018. In Cuba, Cuba has faced a blockade of over 60 years, and this year's report to the United Nations is now showing that 51% of essential medicines and drugs are not available in Cuba. Cuba is not able to get agricultural equipment, school supplies, parts to run their factories, and critical infrastructure due to the U.S. blockade that has imposed over $1.5 trillion of economic losses to Cuba's economy in the last 60 years. So I think this all comes down to the United States considering Latin America its backyard, considering Latin America as the attitude would be of a slaveholder to its slaves, and is trying to maintain its hegemony in Latin America. Every country almost in Latin America, except really Venezuela and Cuba, has some sort of U.S. military base, some sort of U.S. military presence. And that's, I think, why the United States has resorted to so many coups d'etats against Venezuela, so much criminal sabotage and blockade and terrorism against Cuba. Yeah, and I think it's really important in Latin America, but anywhere in the world really, is that the acts of the United States are against countries that are trying to exercise their self-determination and sovereignty, exercise their independence. That is the signal for the United States to intervene, and it doesn't matter what kind of ideology, what kind of government is in power, what kind of path people are choosing in their countries. If it's independent of the United States, if it doesn't follow the imperialist line and dictates from the U.S. domination.
This is decades of, and really more than 100 years of the United States considering Latin America as its backyard, considering that it is a slaveholder basically against all of these Latin American countries, and doesn't see them as having the right to independence, to sovereignty, to self-determination, which these countries are of course trying to exercise. In Venezuela especially, we've seen over the last many years several coups d'etats, even just recently an attempted coup d'etat during the last Venezuelan election this year. We've seen a lot of ongoing decades of sabotage and blockade and terrorism against Cuba. And basically it doesn't really matter what ideology, what form of government these countries are taking, but if it's independent of the United States, if it's not following the dictates of U.S. domination and order, it's a threat to U.S. hegemony. So just looking at how Israel is being condemned in Latin America, and how more and more countries are taking a stand in favor of Palestine. We've seen Nicaragua more recently sever ties with Israel and calling Israel an enemy of humanity. We've seen Colombia cut ties with Israel, including halting coal exports, which is significant. But then really to look to Venezuela and Cuba, Venezuela already cut off diplomatic relations with Israel back in 2009, during, of course, another brutal war by Israel against Gaza and against Palestinians. And Cuba, all the way back in 1973, cut relations with Israel. And every time I've gone to Cuba, I meet Cubans who are studying for free to become doctors in Cuba, who are receiving really the benefit of true solidarity from Cuba. And just this last year, Earlier this year, I was in Cuba twice, and I saw the Cuban president speak twice, Miguel Díaz-Canel, and both times he was wearing the Palestinian keffiyeh, both times he was calling for a ceasefire and was speaking in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. So this is really true solidarity that we are seeing with Palestine.
Tshrin, have protests all across the world helped the armed resistance? Have they created just a slap for the imperial powers or more? We have to keep in mind that the genocide has reached a complete year now in Palestine and has been extended to Lebanon.
Yes, so I think what I can explain the best is really speaking to the protest movement and how that's helped. But really, there are many fronts, I think, of resistance against Israeli Zionist occupation of Palestine. Of course, the armed resistance in Palestine, whether it be Al-Qassam brigades or Islamic Jihad, and of course Hezbollah in Lebanon, all of this has shattered the bubble that Israel has held onto for so long, that it's invincible, that it can act with impunity, and that a state can continue to exist on the brutal occupation of the indigenous people of that land, of course, of Palestinians. So that's, I think, one incredibly important front. Of course, there's the resistance also in terms of people who are resisting just by existing, in terms of Palestinians that are showing their steadfast determination to stay on their land, to rebuild, despite the horrific destruction. They're showing that heroism. It's so inspiring for us here to see Palestinians that are, going up to the north of Gaza after it's been totally destroyed, to find the remains of their homes and to clean it as best as they can, and even set up tents on the ruins of their homes. And this has an impact, I think, on people around the world to see, well, Palestinians are still fighting for their land. Palestinians are still fighting for their self-determination, despite the kind of horrors we can't imagine being done against them. So we have to keep standing with them against, genocide, against these war crimes against humanity. And so I think then, looking to what we're doing here, the protest movement worldwide, it's one front of resistance, and it serves to further isolate Israel, because Israel, as much as it is doing all of these horrific acts day after day, it does rely on having some level of public opinion, of world opinion, and now it doesn't have it anymore. People around the world are seeing a genocide live streamed onto their screens. And despite all of the huge mainstream media propaganda and imperialist narratives, that doesn't make sense to them, and so they're losing that battle of public opinion. So I think millions, really tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people have marched in the streets in this last year. We're seeing a movement like we've never seen before. And partially, I think that's because we've seen the Palestinian resistance and the Lebanese resistance take that stand against Zionist Israel. We've also seen the true solidarity of Hezbollah and Lebanon with Palestine, also of Yemen, of course. And we see this brutality on our screens every day, and the war crimes and crimes against humanity. And that doesn't make sense to people, no matter what they're being told. And I think it is so important that people continue coming out onto the streets and continue really to organize, not just to come out and protest, but to organize ourselves as a movement.
Yeah, let's just not forget the Islamic resistance in Iraq as well, because they have been aiding the Houthis, and the resistance in Lebanon and in Palestine. Yeah, just to give them credit. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. The majority of the Lebanese, Palestinian, Muslim, and Arab people, in the West, do not dare hold the flags of the resistance and are most of the time afraid of being labeled anti-Semitic. On September 28, this this is what actually happened. The Toronto Police Service made 2 arrests after 2 protesters held Hezbollah flags. The police service has charged the men with public incitement of hatred, claiming that the expanded hate crime unit continues to investigate every reported instance of hate, including the presence of flags that promote terrorist organizations. The men under arrest are scheduled to appear at the Ontario Court of Justice on November 14. So what do you think of this?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, and thank you, Zainab, for this question, because we do need to look at what's happening with the government of Canada and the government of the United States and other, countries where people are facing crackdowns as they speak up and as they come to the streets in Britain, in Germany especially, where these governments, imperialist governments and their police have criminalized people as they've come out onto the streets, as they've peacefully protested, just for holding signs, holding flags of liberation, and even threaten people and criminalize people in their jobs. Many people have lost their jobs, lost their positions due to speaking out. And I would say people are daring. People are daring to come out to the streets, to hold their flags of liberation, to hold the Palestinian flag. We've seen so many people also really challenging that narrative of anti-Semitism. And it really doesn't make sense anymore when you have people who are holding signs saying, I'm Jewish and I'm against genocide, I'm Jewish and I support Palestine, holding the Palestinian flag. No matter what the mainstream media says, those images are there. And here in Vancouver too, my own friend and activist here in Vancouver who's from West Asia just last week was detained for about an hour because he had held the Hezbollah flag at a demonstration. So I think really it's not a matter of not daring or being afraid. It's a matter of that we are speaking out and resisting unjust laws that have been used against anyone who speaks out. And these are unjust laws that have been enacted in the years prior to this. We, in Mobilization Against War and Occupation, had sustained protests against Bill C-51, which was passed some years ago here in Canada, that basically is a Canadian version of the Patriot Act in the United States, and aims to crack down on activists, was written very vaguely to be able to be used against activists whenever it's convenient for them. And now we're seeing that since October 7th and Al-Aqsa flood being imposed against people, claiming things like hate crimes, claiming things like anti-Semitism, when really the facts don't add up. So I think really when it comes to the police, not only in Canada, but the US and Germany, they can always use laws against people and target especially people of the Muslim faith, from West Asia or Arab populations. I mean, these laws have been prepared for a long time to be used against activists, be used because the government, I think, knows or knew in the last many years that it's coming up to a period of more resistance of people, both against wars abroad and at home. And we're seeing, of course, that these laws target people of Muslim faith, of West Asian background and heritage, of Arab populations. And so this is really what people are having to deal with, not as a matter of fear, but as a matter of actions really being taken against them. So I think that really us in the Palestine Solidarity movement, we need to fight for our rights. We need to better organize to defend ourselves as activists. Because if we can't defend ourselves, then really we can't defend Palestine, and we need to be defending both our rights here at home and of our Palestinian brothers and sisters and Lebanese brothers and sisters under attack.
Okay. Is it a new era where people are sick of global hegemony? If yes, Isn't it, however, a bit too late? I mean, a lot now.
Yes.
We're seeing a lot of resistance, but shouldn't people like have been acting like, or have acted a long time ago?
Yes, well, I think it's never too late, and of course, you know, we can always wish that things were maybe different. But I think right now, what we're seeing is a buildup of many years in mobilization against war and occupation. MAO, our group here in Vancouver, we, for the last 21 years of our organization, we've characterized this time as a new era of war and occupation, of people fighting back against US-led imperialism from Iraq to Afghanistan, and Yemen and Syria and Libya, of course, especially all of these countries and more. And that people are now coming out more and more onto the streets in imperialist countries, both against the wars abroad, but also against the wars at home, also against further attacks on minorities, further attacks on the Muslim population with Islamophobia at home, against Black and Brown people and Black Lives Matter here at home. So we're seeing more and more a culture of resistance that's growing. And that is, I think, a very inspiring thing, but of course not overnight. So I will say that I believe, yes, we are in an era of resistance to imperialism. And today and in the last year, we've never had such a solidarity and protest movement in the last 50 years. It's a very important and crucial and inspiring time. But we also need to make sure that we're building these movements, that they are going from spontaneous movements of people reacting to what they see to us as anti-war and social justice activists coming together, building and growing these movements to become more strong and effective. And I'll just say, you know, we're seeing more of that, especially in some of the major centers like London and Paris and Germany, Italy and Spain. We're seeing especially strong movements for Palestine in Toronto and Ottawa, and especially Montreal. Very strong movements that have come out every week without fail for the last year. So I think we're in a period where we must remain hopeful. Israel has never been so isolated in the world. They know they can never go back to what they were. In history, we've never seen a country face this kind of condemnation. And also, I think people are waking up a lot and realizing that these international bodies that are supposed to uphold international law, the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court, they can't do what they're mandated to do because really they're US-backed and imperialist tools. So we need the protest movement because humanity and justice is really the place that it will be defended is on the streets.
So Canadian MPs who dare to speak about Palestine or Lebanon are restricted to certain limits. Mostly, the best they can do is call for a two-way arms embargo, therefore unfairly equaling the aggressor with the victims. Activists and other MPs who have shown emotional pleas for Palestine have often been silenced, made to apologize, and even forced to attend some kind of, supposed awareness lessons. So how humanitarian and multicultural is this?
Yes, I agree. And thank you, Zainab, because it is something that we have to be aware of. And it comes back to my previous point that our rights are being restricted here in Canada. The Palestinian issue is not only a fight for Palestine, it's a fight also for our own rights here at home. And yes, people who are on the streets, who are part of protests, are being criminalized, being attacked, but also even MPs who are speaking out from the very beginning, right after October 7th and Al-Aqsa flood, and continuing today. So I think what it comes down to is that to be able to defend our rights, we need a stronger mass movement. If we have more people in an overwhelming majority out on the streets, coming to protests, coming to events, like really in action. That puts more pressure on the government of Canada. It puts more pressure on MPs to speak out rather than one or two here and there, to have more of them speak out, to go against their party lines. But it is definitely requires more support and requires more organized movement.
What makes a writer and activist like you outspoken when others are silent? And do you worry about any kind of implications for speaking out?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm maybe not unique. I would say that people aren't silent. It's been an incredibly inspiring time, because I've seen millions of people coming out onto the street, and I've marched in the street with so many people, and
but
I would say
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is I mean, it's not a compliment, because you know, like, I'm telling you, the majority of people who would support Palestine, for example, they would just say, okay, both ways have to stop, sides of the conflict have to stop fighting. But they never, they never acknowledge that somebody is actually fighting because they've been, assaulted, they've been attacked continuously, and that's why they're resisting. So it's like they're always, okay, both sides of the conflict, you should stop. They seem to forget that those people's houses have been destroyed, entire families have been killed or maimed, etc. So I mean, you are outspoken, you are using the term resistance, which many MPs, and I've seen this all through the years, for long years, so many MPs have not been able to utter the word resistance. Not a single Canadian MP has used this term. So I actually believe that when an activist like you uses this term, okay, that's very courageous. So see, it's not a compliment. I know people are flooding the streets, that's great, but not everybody is ready, to do the best that they can do. They might...
Sure, okay, I think I can explain a bit better. I mean, first of all, for myself personally, I've been an anti-war and social justice activist for over 18 years now. Our organization, Mobilization Against War and Occupation, we've been organizing for 21 years. So I think it becomes very clear when you've been involved that long and seen that it's not just Israel also, that really this is a continuation of US imperialism. And I've seen what has happened with the war in Iraq, the occupation of Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, all of these countries. And after a while, of course, you start to learn to understand the balance of forces, how the mainstream media that, I watch every day. I will still watch the mainstream media because I want to see how they are fooling people, how they are twisting the narratives to brainwash people and create a false consciousness. And so I think being here in Canada, in Vancouver, kind of balancing those two things, understanding what's actually happening, because I've educated myself through being a part of the movement to have a good understanding of why the United States and imperialist powers are attacking and trying to hold on to their hegemony in West Asia, North Africa especially. And then balancing that with, I see what everyone else sees every day. I see the news. I see the totally twisted on its head sort of news reports. And so I understand that people read that and they don't necessarily see the alternative media. They don't necessarily see the same algorithm of social media that I'm getting. So I think we need to really what we try and do is really push for public education. Mobilization Against War and Occupation really makes a big point of trying to see where people are at and make it our priority to provide education for people. Many people are questioning what they hear, but they're looking for something else to explain to them what's actually happening. So important for us in Mobilization Against War and Occupation is to not underestimate the value of public education. We have our info booth, as I said, for Palestine and Lebanon every Sunday in downtown Vancouver, and we have so many people who come up to us confronted with mainstream media, seeing that it doesn't make sense to them and looking for more information, looking for ways that they can understand really what's happening and what they can do about it. So we produce a newsletter that we hand out to people on the streets. This is our 104th edition, and we've produced more than 20 since October 7th last year with updated statements and information. We've produced fact sheets and campaigns such as against Maersk Shipping Company, which is a campaign initiated by the Palestinian Youth Movement internationally against the shipping company Maersk that sends weapons to Israel. We really just make sure that we're out onto the streets talking to people and then giving people steps to take. We have a first, what we like to kind of think of as a first tangible step of signing postcards to US President Biden. People right away, they understand, okay, this is a postcard to Biden because the United States really are the ones that are supplying the weapons. The United States is working hand in hand with Israel. And then inviting people to take the next step, to come to protest, to get involved, to hit the streets with us. So I think, I'm surrounded by many people who are, especially, my fellow organizers in Mobilization Against War and Occupation, organizing for Palestine 24/7. And that's our duty. We have a duty when we're seeing a genocide every day, when we're seeing people in Palestine, in Lebanon, struggling and fighting for self-determination. It's really our duty to be on that side of that struggle. So I think that's the best response I can give to that question.
Tell me, do you worry about any kind of implications?
Of course, it is a reality. It is, and it's something we've faced before. Where we have faced the government of Canada, faced attacks against our activists before from the government of Canada, from the police. We faced crackdowns. We are also very much exercising the rights that are right now afforded to us and making sure that we're very clear that, hey, these are rights that we're exercising. Yes, I mean, we have faced attacks. We had one of our central organizers, actually, who's from the United States, back in, I think, 2009, banned from Canada for a number of years and was politically targeted, and now, thankfully, is back in Vancouver. Her name's Alison Bodine. In those situations, and if we face those attacks again, we know that our best defense is to come together, to work with other groups, and to show that we can defend our rights. So being part of a organization like Mobilization Against War and Occupation, we know that we have to be very ready to defend our rights. The bottom line is, yes, if you're one person, you're a lot more vulnerable. But if we are organizing together, if we're really being clear on the necessity of defending our rights, if we're seeing ourselves as part of a broader movement and organized with a solid and really an organization with a clear vision, I think that helps us to be able to confront those challenges and continue organizing in the face of government or police repression. Well, actually, interestingly, we have in the last many years, sometimes we'll have a petition and someone will say, well, I'm worried about signing that and being in trouble. And more, I haven't really heard that this last year. I think people have come up and been very eager to sign our postcards, being eager to take information. I think people are starting to see that it's a lot scarier to be in a world where you can't speak up against genocide than it is to just accept that. So people are speaking out and defending not just Palestine, but defending our own rights.
Following the recent explosions of pages in Lebanon, are people anywhere safe any longer? And what do you think should be done?
Yes, I think this was a really an unprecedented terrorist attack. I think for many people, it really further exposed Zionist Israel as a terrorist state. We saw how Western media really tried to scramble to frame this Israeli Zionist terrorist attack and call it things like a sophisticated or complex or technologically advanced operation. But really, it's very clear if anyone is reading that to see, no, this is a terrorist attack. This is a terrorist attack outside even of the borders that Israel claims. And I think it should make people think a little bit about how technology today is in the hands of imperialists. And we have to ask ourselves what we can do. Of course, we can try and buy other brands. We can try and maybe buy more Chinese brands or others that we think might not be in the supply chain of imperialist influence or Israeli Zionist influence. But really, we don't have a lot of choices. We're forced really to buy these devices because we need to stay informed. We need to communicate. And I hope that more people who read about this, who saw news of this terrorist attack, that it helps them to understand how Israel really is a terrorist state that's putting everyone at risk.
According to Montreal-based social justice activist, writer, and member of Tadamon, Mary Foster, former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien and Minister of Foreign Affairs Bill Graham Foreign Minister of Foreign Affairs. Yes, so they had resisted placing Hezbollah on the terror list. Chrétien met with late Secretary General of Hezbollah Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut in October 2002, and after the 2006 Israeli aggression on Lebanon, 3 Canadian MPs visited Lebanon, and Quebec politicians participated in Montreal's August rally against the attack on Lebanon. Of course, pressure by Canada's pro-Israel lobby and the military-industrial complex led to demonizing Hezbollah and labeling them terrorists. Could Canada have taken a different path? Would it still be possible in the foreseeable future?
Yes, so first of all, I'll say that Canada has always supported Zionism and supported Israel. There's even a Canada Park in Israel built on a Palestinian village. So Canada, I think, is now having to take more of a direct stand in favor of Zionism, in favor of Israel, and against organizations, including Hezbollah, or really any resistance to Zionist and imperialist aggression, because it's becoming it's coming to the forefront more. Maybe in the past it was a bit easier to not take such a very direct or hard position, but now we're facing really the life or death of Israel as a state. So Canada, the state and government of Canada, is making those lines, drawing those lines clearer, and taking more drastic steps, because it has to support Israel as it is. because they are part of this imperialist policy of maintaining US and Canadian and other imperialist countries' hegemony in West Asia and North Africa especially. So I think for us, really, our job is to have a bigger protest and solidarity movement. The only way that we can really change the position of politicians is to put them in a position where they cannot keep going with their current position. They can't keep going with their current narrative if there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, really millions of people putting that pressure on. Because if really, at the end of the day, I think what matters is the numbers. If we have more people organizing, not just spontaneously, but as a movement, then we'll have more politicians that are coming onto the side of oppressed people. We'll have more of a pressure against these policies than there are for these policies. So I think that's what it comes down to. I don't think the government of Canada will just make that choice. I think it has to be pushed to, and that comes from the sheer force of numbers of people across Canada.
Okay, how connected to reality are those who brand resistance forces and the public that supports them as terrorists? Most of those have not even been to the Middle East or have only listened to one side of the conflict.
Yes, so I think, when I talk to people, I think people are generally good. I think people generally don't want to see the things that they're seeing on their screens. Even people who, you mentioned before, people who said, oh, I just want both sides to stop and I want to remain unbiased. Even that's a starting point with people because they don't understand what's happening because they've been fed with lies. They've been fed with falsifications and really an insidious mainstream media. I was just reading a report this morning how it's not even just saying this side good, this side bad, but the words that are used that dehumanize Palestinian people, Lebanese people, that characterize in a very subconscious way to paint a narrative for people. That's something very difficult to break. And we don't have the millions of dollars, of course. We don't have the kind of reach of mainstream media, but we do have people that are looking for a different narrative, who are looking for alternative news and sources. So it's really our job as activists, as the protest movement, not just to shut people out and say, oh, you don't understand what's happening, but to really help people, to help the majority of people break out of a cloud of misinformation. It's our responsibility to provide alternative information and education for people because we know that people are looking for that what they're seeing on their screens is not making sense. So I think really people are the victims of the conditioning that they're being faced. What I like to think is that sometimes we underestimate how important public opinion is. And I think to myself, if it wasn't so important, then the media would not be working overtime to try and convince us of the unconvincible. They would be trying to somehow, through whatever gymnastics they try, that a genocide is justified. And so if that is so true, if the fact that they're spending millions and billions really on this mass media campaign of misinformation, then that shows our opinion is important. And we've seen it before. We've seen during the Vietnam War how the daily life of people changed because they were impacted by what was happening in Vietnam, because they saw also for themselves when they had the body bags of their brothers and fathers coming back from war, that it became a dining room table, a kitchen table issue. It became, part of culture, became part of so much music and songs from that era to reflect a resistance to the Vietnam War, alongside, of course, the resistance of the Vietnamese people. So we, I think, are starting to see that again, that this is becoming an issue that people are talking about in their families, with their friends, and we need to also be providing more of that education and alternative media. But this is it's really a big war of information, and that we are part of as activists and organizers.
Okay, I'd like to hear your opinion concerning anti-immigrant sentiment, keeping in mind that massive immigrations are primarily linked to foreign interference with countries of the global south.
Yes. I think partially, yes, there is an anti-immigrant sentiment, but more so than that, specifically Islamophobia and anti-Semitic sentiment that has been an issue in Canada. I'd say the issue of anti-Semitic, just because actually Israel itself is driving that. Israel is the force that makes people equate Zionism with Judaism. So we are seeing a rise of attacks against mosques and synagogues, but we're seeing a government and police force that, of course, is more concerned with defending anti-Semitism and downplaying Islamophobia, and actually not just downplaying, but promoting Islamophobia. So I think our job is really to make sure that we keep Islamophobia in check, to make sure that we are pushing against it, to show that Islamophobia is part of an anti-Palestine, anti-Arab, anti-Lebanon propaganda, and help people to understand that really this is a tactic of division. And of course, we've seen this for years. It's the us versus them. It's the divide and conquer. It's the othering. And I think when we talk to people, need to help people to understand how much they might have in common with someone of a different religion, of someone of a different faith, of someone of a different skin color, and that there's more in common than there is dividing us, and that this division is really not just now, but I think, Islamophobia was used to fuel the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, to try and make people think that, to try and dehumanize the people that are having bombs dropped on them. So we try in many different ways to counter that. Also, whether, culturally, throughout many years, we've had cultural events and help people to understand that we're all the same people, and that really it's the governments, these imperialist governments, that are not only attacking countries abroad, but are also attacking us here at home, and that we are stronger when we come together against it.
Okay. How threatening is Iran to the world? And why is Iran always demonized, despite the fact that it is a multicultural country with a very rich social fabric, including Jews, and despite the fact that it has led a successful revolution against the US-backed dictator, the Shah, and has since supported resistance movements in the Middle East?
Yes, thank you, Zainab. That's a very key issue and something we need to discuss more. Of course, this is something that we talk to people about, that they're very surprised when we say in Iran, there's around, I believe, 20,000 Jewish people from the last time I saw statistics, 50 active synagogues, and without guards. In the United States, you have guards at synagogues because there is a problem of anti-Semitism in the United States. But Jewish people historically have been safest in the Middle East, in West Asia. I think that also this is because Iranian people see a difference between Zionism and Judaism. And the leader of the Iranian Revolution, Imam Khomeini, and now Imam Khamenei, the Grand Leader and Ayatollah, and of course, the martyr Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, emphasized many times the difference between Judaism and Zionism, and recognized that Zionism is a fascist and colonial force supported by imperialism and a tool of imperialism. So I think that's one important thing for people to understand, and that we try and discuss with people here in Vancouver. But I think really the problem that imperialists have with Iran is not anything else but the independence of Iran. And that the 1979 Iranian Revolution, as you mentioned, was a huge defeat for US imperialism and a huge step forward, not just for Iran, but for the whole region, to have an example of independence and anti-colonialism. I think also for people to, what we often discuss is that Iran is a massive country with many different multiple nationalities that are reflected also in other countries in the region, that they border 13 countries by land and sea. They're in a very strategic position, which the United States, of course, really wants to be able to control, and has a large population of over 90 million, and with that, of course, a large military that can't be underestimated, really the strongest army in West Asia and North Africa. Also, I think what we know from the United States and their, how they say, see value, is how significant both resource-wise and economically Iran is, with huge resources of oil and liquid gas and uranium and many different metals and minerals, and a major exporter of all these resources. And that despite really the massive sanctions campaign, more than 2,000 different sanctions from the United States and other imperialist countries, that Iran has proven it can be independent and successful and defend itself and its rights. And that after 45 years of sanctions and a blockade, that they've achieved so much technologically, scientifically. They've advanced to have a very well-educated population, very technologically and scientifically advanced. And that makes imperialists like the United States very nervous, because this is also the threat of a good example. It's an inspiration to other countries in West Asia. But I just besides all of that, I think, of course, as you mentioned, Iran is the main supporter of the axis of resistance that's defending Palestine and Lebanon. And it is no small thing that just recently the Iranian head of parliament yesterday, and before that the Iranian foreign minister, landed in Beirut, visited Beirut, met with the government and with people being bombed. And that is a huge signal that we are not afraid, and that we are continuing to work together. So I think that Iran's significance, as you asked, is huge. Iran is really the only power that can fight Israel effectively, with, of course, the support of others in the axis of resistance. And above all, I think the Iranian Revolution of 1979 is still a force that resonates today throughout the region and worldwide, to signify the importance of independence and self-determination, which is something the United States and imperialism can't accept.
During a recent protest in Vancouver, some protesters chanted "Death to the United States, death to Israel, and death to Canada," eliciting a barrage of responses from angry Canadians who showed rage and asked the Canadian authorities to deport those people that they call terrorists, the people who made those chants. So while it could be understood that such slogans are addressed to the colonial powers fueling the Israeli killing machine, the timing of such slogans and the burning of the Canadian flag is suspicious. After all, the Israelis are losing the narrative, like you said. So could it have been a staged performance to demonize pro-Palestine protesters? now that they have started to gain far wider support than ever before?
Yes, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, Zainab, because it is so important that we, as a protest movement, as a solidarity movement with Palestine, that we stay focused on what we're demanding, how we can build our movements, and regardless of who made those statements saying, death to Canada, I believe that this is a massive distraction. Right now, the point is Israel, Zionist Israel, and Palestine, and US imperialism. And bringing other issues into this is not helping Palestine. It's not helping to build our big and effective and strong protest movement for Palestine, and instead pushes people away. I think we really need to hold as the most important thing, the most important key objective, to build our movement, to find common ground, to find common denominators with people who are coming from all sorts of different political backgrounds, to advance solidarity with Palestine, and to advance, I think, as a most urgent demand, a ceasefire in Gaza, and then help people, as I said, many times, help people through education, help people through, understanding that the narrative that they're being fed is many lies and misinformation, to help them understand the importance of the self-determination of Palestine and Lebanon. And I think whatever we do as activists, as organizers, we have a huge responsibility. And when we take any action, we need to always be thinking, how does this action, how does this step that I'm taking as an activist, as an organizer, how does it impact the movement? How does this put our cause in a better or worse position? And I think that action that you mentioned, calling for death to Canada, burning the Canadian flag, is a distraction from our movement for Palestine, for solidarity with Palestine. And I think instead we need to focus on building a united front, helping to educate people, helping to build our movement. And really, as I said earlier, numbers are what pushes the dial. Numbers are what really is the force of change. And we need to be focusing on ways that we can bring more people together, ways that we can, connect and unify people rather than dividing people.
Are there any other points you would like to address? Although you said a lot of, great things, actually, and again, I say this is no compliment. You've given me very positive vibes, actually. I mean, what you said was very logical, it made sense, and yeah, it's satisfying to the mind. Yeah. So anyway, sorry for interrupting you again. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Zainab. And I'm very honored that you reached out and conducted this interview. I know it's not easy at all, and inshallah we'll be celebrating together the victory against Zionist occupation. But maybe just to close, I think I want to reiterate and emphasize that we have two really important tasks of our struggle, especially for people like myself in the West, in Canada or the United States. We have an enormous potential of people on the streets. As I said, we have this period in history, this critical point where people are responding to what they're seeing on their screens. They can't accept to see a genocide committed every day. And they're realizing that they are the force of justice, not the United Nations, not the ICC or ICJ. We are the force of justice, of humanity. But we have to move that from a spontaneous protest movement to an organized movement. We have to, myself and our organization and other organizations that we work with across Canada or throughout the United States or internationally, we need to build a united front across political lines to a strong and effective movement. First, of course, for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, and then on to the self-determination of Palestine and Lebanon. And I think also, as we talked many times about, is that we need to prepare ourselves in Canada and the US and all imperialist countries for further attacks on our rights to speech and our rights to assembly. We need to really be ready to defend ourselves, because if we can't defend our rights, then we can't defend Palestine in the coming wars and occupations in West Asia. This is a long fight. And we need to be prepared to be organized together and to be defending ourselves alongside Palestine and other countries facing imperialist and Zionist attacks. So I encourage people to reach out if you're in Vancouver or even not in Vancouver and want to connect. Of course, I'm representing Mobilization Against War and Occupation, MAWO. We're online on Twitter, on Facebook, on TikTok, on Instagram at MAWO-VAN, M-A-W-O VAN. Our website is MAWO, M-A-W-O, Vancouver.org. And we want to keep working together, keep organizing together, and working for a free Palestine.
Everyone, I want to see the sign of victory on your fingers. Raise your hands high. Our brothers and sisters.
الله نصر الله والضاحية كلها الله نصر الله والضاحية كلها.
Soy un guerrero, nadie me puede parar. Con la fuerza en mi pecho listo para luchar. Romper barreras, no voy a dudar. Mis cartas están listas, estoy para ganar. La victoria nos llama, el miedo se va. Que yo soy un ganador, que yo soy un campeón. No hay nada que me frene, late mi corazón. Juntos como guerreros levantamos la voz, reventamos barreras, siempre voz de Dios. Con voluntad firme, yo nunca me detengo, enfrento los retos, ahí yo me entrego. La perseverancia es mi gran aliado, inteligencia y fuerza siempre a mi lado. Levanto las manos, el triunfo es real. Que yo soy un ganador, que yo soy un campeón. No hay nada que me frene, late mi corazón. Juntos como guerreros levantamos la voz, reventamos barreras, siempre voz de Dios. Con determinación, siempre en la misión. Así que ven conmigo, así es la canción. Con voluntad yo nunca me detengo, enfrento los retos, a ello me entrego. La perseverancia es mi gran aliado, inteligencia y fuerza siempre a mi lado. Levanto las manos, el triunfo es real. Que yo soy un ganador, que yo soy un campeón. No hay nada que me frene, late mi corazón. Juntos como guerreros levantamos la voz, reventamos barreras siempre en pos de Dios. Con determinación siempre en la misión, así que ven conmigo, así es la canción.